The call came in at 9:25 on a Tuesday night. Not from Tara. Not from anyone I expected. It was the Domino's driver, a college kid named Devin who sounded genuinely confused when I picked up. "Hey, sir? I'm at the address you gave me. 840 Meridian Parkway, Suite 300, but the building is completely dark. Like, there's no one here. The lobby lights are off. The parking lot's basically empty. There's a security guard walking the perimeter and he's telling me the office complex closed at 6:30. I stood in my kitchen in Brentwood, Tennessee, holding a glass of water I'd poured and forgotten to drink, and I asked Devin to say that again. "The building's empty, sir. Has been for hours. Should I just cancel the order or—" "No," I said. "Just go ahead and cancel it. I'm sorry for the trouble." I hung up. Set the glass down on the counter. Very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started shaking and you don't want anyone to see. Tara had texted me at 6:50 that evening, running behind on the Henderson account, probably going to be here until 9 or 10. "Don't wait up." She'd sent that from a building that had been locked since 6:30. "My name is Griffin Calloway. I'm 37 years old. I manage logistics operations for a regional shipping company headquartered just outside Nashville. And until 9 months ago, I was the kind of man who thought the worst problem in his marriage was that he worked too many overtime hours. I coached youth baseball on Saturdays. I mowed the lawn on Sundays. I was boring in all the ways that are supposed to keep a marriage stable. What I'm about to tell you is not a dramatic story about a man who went looking for trouble. It's a story about what happens when trouble finds you through a canceled pizza order. Before I go any further, if this story is hitting close to home for you, or if you've ever felt like something in your life didn't add up, but you couldn't put your finger on what, subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's the smallest thing that ever made you realize something huge? Because I'm convinced it's never the big things that break you. It's always the small ones. The 9:14 phone call. The pizza that never got delivered. Let's get into it. Tara and I met in 2012 at a mutual friend's housewarming party in East Nashville. She was 26. I was 28. She worked as a client relations manager for a mid-sized marketing firm downtown, the kind of job that required her to be charming on demand, which she was, exceptionally so. She could walk into a room of strangers and within 20 minutes make each of them feel like they were the most interesting person she'd ever met. That quality was one of the first things I loved about her. It was also, I would eventually understand, one of the first signs I missed. We got married in 2015 at a venue in Franklin, Tennessee. Small wedding, 70 people. Her parents drove down from Clarksville. My dad flew in from Phoenix. My younger brother Derek was my best man and gave a toast that made our grandmother cry. We honeymooned in Asheville because we'd planned to go to Portugal but couldn't quite make the budget work that year. We told ourselves we'd do Portugal for our 5th anniversary. We never made it to Portugal. The marriage was good for a long time. Genuinely good. Not the kind of good where people mean they'd stopped fighting because they'd stopped caring. We had disagreements, real ones. About money. About whose turn it was to call the plumber. About whether we were spending enough time with each other versus time with our separate circles. Normal friction. What I didn't notice, because I wasn't looking, was the moment the friction stopped. About 14 months before that Tuesday night in my kitchen, Tara became easier to live with. She stopped pushing back on things that used to bother her. She stopped asking me why I was late, or why I'd forgotten to pick up the dry cleaning. She laughed more. She seemed lighter, somehow. More relaxed. Looking back, I can trace it now. The way a person who has decided to leave stops investing in the arguments that would require them to stay. If you're already building something elsewhere, you don't need the same things from home. You don't need to be understood. You don't need to be heard. You just need things to stay quiet enough that you can keep moving without being noticed. Tara got very, very good at quiet, and I, because I was not looking for it, took it as peace. At the time, I told my buddy Nate, who I've known since we played college baseball together in Murfreesboro, I told him that I thought Tara and I had finally figured out the rhythm of marriage, that we'd hit some kind of stride. Nate, who is occasionally irritating in how perceptive he is, just nodded and said, "Or one of you stopped caring what the other one does." I thought he was being cynical. Nate's been divorced once and has opinions about marriage the way some people have opinions about the designated hitter rule. loudly and without being asked. But standing in my kitchen at 9:14 on a Tuesday night, his words felt like something I'd swallowed wrong. The working late pattern had started about 5 months earlier. Not every week. Not even every other week. Just occasional. A Tuesday here, a Thursday there. Always the Henderson account, or the Delacroix campaign, or some client dinner that ran long. Always plausible. Always just specific enough to sound real. I'd never questioned it. That's the thing about trust. It doesn't ask you to question things. It just assumes. But I'd sent that pizza because I'd had a long day myself. Because I remembered Tara saying once that she couldn't stand Domino's, but I happened to know that under enough stress she'd eat anything. And I'd wanted to do something small and kind. Something that said, "I know you're tired. I'm thinking about you." Instead, I'd accidentally built a trap I hadn't known I was setting. I pulled out my phone and looked at her 6:50 text again. Then I opened her contact page and just stared at it for a while. I could call her. I could ask her where she was. I could do this the direct way, the honest way, the way that would give her a chance to explain. But something cold had settled in my chest, the kind of cold that tells you the explanation isn't going to fix anything, that the explanation is just going to be another layer to the thing you're already feeling. So instead of calling, I did something I'd never done before in 9 years with Tara. I waited. She came home at 10:42. I heard her keys in the lock, the soft thud of her bag hitting the entryway bench, the sound of her kicking off her shoes. I was in the living room with the lights low, watching absolutely nothing on the television. "Hey," she said, coming around the corner. "You're still up." "Couldn't sleep," I said. She looked relaxed, hair slightly disheveled, but in the casual way, not the rushed way. A little flushed in the cheeks. She'd reapplied lipstick at some point in the evening because the color was too even, too fresh for 10:42 after a full day of work. "Henderson account wrapped up?" I asked. "Finally," she said, heading to the kitchen for water. "That man wants revisions on revisions. I swear." I didn't say anything about the pizza. I didn't say anything about Devin, the delivery driver. I didn't say anything about the security guard at 840 Meridian Parkway who had confirmed that the building had been locked since 6:30. I just said, "Glad it's done. Come to bed when you're ready." And I went upstairs and lay there in the dark with my eyes open until I heard her follow me up 40 minutes later. She fell asleep within minutes. That easy, immediate sleep that belongs to people who've convinced themselves they've done nothing wrong. Or maybe to people who've simply gotten very practiced at compartmentalization, at keeping two versions of a life in separate boxes and never letting them touch. I lay there and listened to her breathe and thought about Devin, the delivery driver, and his confused voice on the phone. "The building is completely dark, sir." I thought about the security guard walking his perimeter at 840 Meridian Parkway. I thought about the fact that at this exact moment, somewhere in Nashville, Caleb Whitmore was also sleeping, also untroubled, also completely unaware that a Domino's driver had just cracked the whole thing open. And I thought, okay, now I know something. The question is what I do with it. The next morning I called a woman named Patricia Olson, who I'd been referred to by one of the attorneys we use at work for contract disputes. Patricia wasn't that kind of attorney. Patricia handled exactly this kind of situation. She was calm, methodical, and had a voice like she'd heard everything twice. I explained what I knew. She asked me some questions. Then, she referred me to an investigator named Ray, who worked out of a small office near 12 South and had been doing this work for 19 years. I want to be clear about something. I did not make these calls because I wanted revenge. I didn't make them because I was angry, though I was. I made them because I'm a logistics manager. I track shipments. I manage supply chains. I have spent my entire professional life understanding that the gap between what you're told and what's actually happening is where everything falls apart, and that you cannot solve a problem you haven't fully mapped. I needed to know the shape of what I was dealing with before I made a single move. Ray was efficient. He didn't editorialize. He gave me a report 2 weeks later with documentation that established that Tara had been meeting a man named Caleb Whitmore on a regular basis. Caleb was 41, recently separated, and worked as a commercial real estate developer with an office in the Gulch neighborhood of Nashville. They'd been meeting at a restaurant called Etch on Union Street, at a hotel called the Thompson on 4th Avenue, at a private parking garage near Vanderbilt, where apparently they sat in his car for stretches of time that suggested they were not discussing real estate. The first time had been 9 months ago. 3 months before the working late pattern started, which meant for 6 months she'd been planning the logistics of deception while I was coaching youth baseball and mowing the lawn. I sat in Ray's office looking at the documentation, and I want to tell you that I felt some dramatic rush of emotion, rage, heartbreak, the floor dropping out from under me. But the honest answer is that I mostly felt tired, the kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep, the kind that settles into your bones and makes everything feel slightly far away. I thought about Portugal. I thought about our 70-person wedding in Franklin and my brother Derek's toast that made our grandmother cry. Then I thought about the fact that Tara had looked me in the face at 10:42 on a Tuesday night and told me she'd been in a meeting with a client named Henderson who did not, as far as Ray could determine, actually exist. I folded the report into my briefcase, thanked Ray, and drove back to Brentwood. Here's what I didn't do, and I think this is the part of the story that matters most. I did not confront Tara that night, or the next night. I did not send her a dramatic text. I did not call Caleb Whitmore. I did not post anything on social media. I did not tell anyone except Nate, and only because Nate is the one person in my life who I knew would keep his mouth shut and give me perspective that wasn't filtered through what he thought I wanted to hear. Nate listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which, if you know Nate, is something close to miraculous. And then he said, "What do you want, Griff? Not what's fair, not what she deserves. What do you actually want?" And I thought about that for a long time. What I wanted was not to be the man who exploded. I'd seen what explosions did. My parents had a detonation of a divorce when I was 11, the kind with screaming and lawyers and my brother and I shuttling between 2 houses with 2 sets of rules, and it took our family years to stop vibrating from the impact. I'd gone into my own marriage determined to be different, to be steadier, but I also wasn't going to stay. That much was completely clear. There was no version of this where I looked at the Thompson Hotel on 4th Avenue and rebuilt something I could live inside. Some people do. I understand that. I'm not judging anyone who makes that choice. But I knew myself well enough to know that I couldn't, and pretending otherwise would just be another layer of deception in a situation that had already had too many. So I made a plan. Methodical, step by step. First, I called our family attorney, a man named Douglas Marsh, who had done our estate planning when we bought the house, and who was professional enough not to ask unnecessary questions. I told him I needed to understand the legal landscape of a divorce in Tennessee. He walked me through the basics and referred me to a family law specialist named Sandra Vega, whose office was in Cool Springs. Second, I began quietly separating my financial footprint. Not in any way that was illegal. Sandra was very specific about what I could and couldn't do, but in ways that were prudent, moving my personal savings account to a bank Tara had no affiliation with, documenting shared assets, getting clear on what was mine before the marriage and what we'd built together. Third, I started making arrangements for a place to stay. My college friend Marcus, different Marcus, not the one who shows up in other people's stories, had a spare bedroom in his house in Germantown that he'd been offering to various friends for years as a semi-joke. I called him and asked if the offer was still open. He said yes without asking any questions that couldn't wait. Fourth, I waited for a moment that felt right. That moment came on a Friday night 3 weeks after my conversation with Ray. Tara had told me she had a work dinner with a new client in Green Hills. I knew, because Ray had sent me a brief follow-up, that she was actually at the Thompson again. She'd probably be home around 10:30. I spent that Friday evening moving my things, not all of them. I didn't need all of them. I took my clothes, my personal documents, my laptop, my grandfather's tools that lived in the garage, my baseball gear, the framed photo of my parents from before everything fell apart, and the small wooden box where I kept my grandfather's watch. I loaded everything into my truck in 3 trips and drove it to Marcus's place in Germantown. 3 trips, 9 years of marriage. I stood in the driveway after the last one, looking at the house, the one we'd bought together on a Saturday afternoon in March, because Tara had fallen in love with the way the light came through the kitchen windows in the late afternoon. We'd negotiated the price together sitting in the real estate office on a shared legal pad, passing it back and forth. We'd painted the living room on a long weekend with a playlist she'd put together specifically for painting, which is one of those extraordinarily ordinary things about a shared life that you don't realize you're going to miss until you're standing in a driveway at 9 o'clock on a Friday night saying goodbye to a house. I let myself stand there for exactly 1 minute. Then I got in the truck and drove to Germantown. I left the house exactly as it was. Clean, organized, nothing out of place. On the kitchen counter, where Tara would see it when she came home, I left 2 things. One was my house key. The other was a printed photograph I'd taken on my phone during one of my late-night drives past 840 Meridian Parkway. The building in the dark. The empty parking lot. Lobby lights off. No note. No explanation. Nothing written at all. Just the photo of an empty building and a key that said, "I know, and I'm done." I've thought a lot about why I did it that way. The easy answer is that I wanted her to understand, in one clean image, exactly what had unraveled everything. The pizza, the driver, Devin's confused voice at 9:14 on a Tuesday, the 840 Meridian Parkway security guard who told him the building had been dark for hours. All of it compressed into a single photograph that required no explanation, because the explanation was obvious. But the deeper answer is that I didn't want a conversation. Not then. Every conversation has an escape hatch. Every confrontation gives the other person a chance to reframe, to minimize, to perform enough remorse that you start wondering if maybe you're being too harsh. I'd watched my father have 6 months of those conversations with my mother, watched him get worn down and confused, and occasionally convinced that things were better than they were, right up until they definitively weren't. I wasn't going to do that. The photo was a door closing, quietly, with both hands, until the latch caught. Tara called me 11 times between 11:02 and 11:47 that night. I know because my phone was face up on Marcus's kitchen table while Marcus and I watched old baseball highlights and didn't talk much. She texted, "Griffin, what is talk much?" She texted, "Griffin, what is this?" Then, "Can we please talk?" Then, "This isn't what you think." I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I was trying to punish her, genuinely not for that reason, but because I'd said everything I needed to say with a printed photograph on a kitchen counter, and anything else would just be me undoing it. She called Nate at midnight. He texted me. She called. I didn't answer. "You okay?" I texted back, "Yeah, thanks." The next morning, Sandra Vega filed the initial paperwork. What followed over the next 4 months was the legal and practical deconstruction of a 9-year marriage, and I'm not going to walk you through every step of it because this isn't that kind of story. The short version is, Tara didn't contest anything in ways that made things worse than they needed to be. I think the photograph had done something to whatever script she'd prepared. She seemed, from what Sandra described, genuinely caught off guard by the fact that I hadn't wanted a conversation, that I'd just left. Her mother called me once, Lorraine, who'd always been decent to me. She said, "Griffin, I'm not calling to take sides. I just want to understand what happened." I told her that I didn't think sides were the right way to think about it, that her daughter had made choices, and I'd made choices in response, that I wished Tara nothing bad, and I meant that. Lorraine got quiet for a moment and then said, "She told me it just kind of happened, that she didn't plan it." And I said, "She was meeting him for 9 months, Lorraine. At some point, planning and happening start looking the same." Lorraine didn't have an answer for that. Caleb Whitmore, for what it's worth, was back on dating apps within 6 weeks of everything coming out. Tara apparently found that out herself, which is a particular kind of reckoning that I had nothing to do with and didn't feel the need to gloat over. You reap what you plant. That's not cynicism. That's just agriculture. The house sold in February. Tennessee real estate moves fast when the price is right and both parties want it done. We split the equity and went our separate ways. I found an apartment in the Hillsborough Village neighborhood of Nashville, the actual city, not the suburbs, which felt like a deliberate choice I hadn't consciously made. A top-floor unit with big windows and a view of the tree line, and enough room for the baseball gear and my grandfather's tools, and the life I was apparently going to have to rebuild from scratch at 37. The first night I slept there alone with just a mattress on the floor and a lamp I'd grabbed from Marcus's garage, I thought I would feel something devastating. Loss, or grief, or the specific loneliness of having had a life and no longer having it. What I actually felt was quiet, not happy. I want to be careful about how I say this. I wasn't over anything. I wasn't healed. I still had nights in that apartment where the weight of it all hit me sideways. Driving past a restaurant we'd liked, finding an old vacation photo in a folder on my laptop, that kind of thing. Healing isn't linear. Anyone who tells you it is has either never been through it or is trying to sell you something. But underneath all of that, there was a quiet I hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet of a life that was actually mine. Nate came over for dinner about a month after I moved in. I made pasta because it's the one thing I can cook without consulting my phone. We sat at a table I'd bought secondhand from a couple in Green Hills who were upgrading to something fancier, and Nate said, "Okay, talk to me. How are you actually doing?" And I told him the truth. I said, "I'm angry sometimes. I'm sad sometimes. I'm also, weirdly, grateful. Not for what happened. I want to be clear about that. I'm not someone who believes in the kind of gratitude that requires pretending the thing that hurt you was secretly a gift. What Tara did was a choice she made about someone else's life, my life, without my knowledge or consent. There's no reframe that makes that okay. But if Devin the delivery driver hadn't called me that night, if I'd just assumed Tara was fine and gone to bed at 9:30, if the building at 840 Meridian Parkway had somehow been lit up and busy when it should have been locked and dark, I'd still be mowing the lawn on Sundays and coaching youth baseball on Saturdays and thinking I'd found the rhythm of my marriage. Instead, I know who I am. I know what I can survive. I know that I can make a decision in a crisis and stick to it, and that I can close a door when it needs to be closed, and that I can build something from scratch if I have to. I know that I'd rather have a quiet apartment in Hillsborough Village that is entirely honest than a nice house in Brentwood that has a lie living in it. That's not nothing. I want to tell you one more thing before I go. About 4 months after I moved into the apartment, I got a text from Tara. Not a call. A text, which I think was her way of giving me an out. She said, "I know I don't deserve a response. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. Not for getting caught. For what I did. There's a difference, and I understand if you don't believe me." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "I believe you. Take care of yourself, Tara." And I meant that. All of it. Both the belief and the goodbye embedded in it. Because here's the thing I've come to understand about betrayal, and I've had enough months now to actually think this through instead of just react to it. The people who hurt you are rarely monsters. That would almost be easier, honestly. Tara isn't a monster. She made a series of choices that prioritized what she wanted over the life we'd built, and she made those choices over 9 months in ways that required active, deliberate concealment. That's damage. That's a kind of selfishness I don't know how to forgive on a schedule. But she's also someone who texted me at midnight from an empty house and said, "This isn't what you think." And I believe that in her mind, in the story she was telling herself, maybe it wasn't. People are extraordinarily talented at making the story they need in order to keep doing the thing they're doing. I'm not interested in being angry at her forever. That's not grace. That's just something I'd be carrying that she wouldn't even feel. What I'm interested in is this apartment, this quiet, this life that is actually mine, and maybe, eventually, the kind of person who will look me in the eye at 10:42 at night and tell me the truth about where she's been. That's worth waiting for. That's worth building from scratch. My name is Griffin Calloway. I'm a logistics manager from Brentwood, Tennessee. I sent my wife a surprise pizza because I wanted to do something kind, and a delivery driver named Devin called me to say the building was completely dark. I didn't ask her where she was. I just sent her a photo of the empty building and moved my things out before she got home, and it turned out to be the most honest conversation I ever had with her. This story is a masterclass in what I call the small crack. Griffin is a logistics manager. His whole life is about tracking things, making sure they are where they're supposed to be. So, when a $20 pizza order doesn't match the reality of a dark building, his entire world desynchronizes. What I find most powerful about Griffin is his restraint. Most people would have called Tara screaming at 9:15 p.m. But Griffin? He waited. He gathered facts. He treated his marriage's collapse like a shipping error that needed to be mapped out before it could be solved. Some might call that cold, but I call it survival. He knew that once you see the dark building, you can never unsee it. The ending with the photograph on the counter is pure cinematic genius. He didn't give her a chance to lie, to reframe, or to give him a fake apology. He just gave her the truth in a 4x6 print. He understood that some conversations are better held in silence. Griffin's journey tells us that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of honesty. He traded a comfortable lie in a big house for a quiet truth in a small apartment. And at 37, that takes a level of courage most people don't have. He didn't just cancel a pizza order that night, he canceled a life that was no longer his.